Doug Ford lauded the fact that he gave out his personal cell phone number so that Ontarians could call him and give them their concerns directly. But Doug Ford canceled that number, saying that special interest groups made him do it. But we all know the real truth. Doug Ford canceled the number because Ontarians just plain don't like him. Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by. You know, Doug Ford is off to a pretty rough start as Premier. He's been Premier for just over a year now, and he's already extremely unpopular. He's already more unpopular now than Kathleen Wynne was when she left office. And of course we know Kathleen Wynne was extremely unpopular. Doug Ford's policies are unpopular. The way his government operates is unpopular. The controversies around the government, from accusations of nepotism to the conduct of ministers like Lisa MacLeod, is unpopular. And so it's no surprise that Doug Ford gets a lot of criticism from regular Ontarians. And so when Doug Ford gave out his number, I don't think he expected getting the kind of reception he's gotten. I think Doug Ford did this not out of a sense of duty to be transparent and connected to the people, but because he honestly thought he would get adoration and praise from Ontarians. He thought he would be so popular and so loved, and that the real Ontarians, not the downtown Toronto elites, but the real Ontarians would call him and text him and say, Doug, you're doing a great job. Don't listen to those liberals at the Star or those New Democrats. Don't listen to the union bosses. Keep going, Doug. We love you. And he was going to feel validated by these phone calls. I honestly believe that's what he thought was going to happen. And so what almost certainly happened is that Doug Ford did not get a whole slew of supportive phone calls and texts. He probably got a whole deal of criticism. Criticism about the cuts he's made. Criticism about the nepotism that his government has enabled. Criticism about the conduct of his ministers. And criticism about how the government's platform in no way matches what they're actually doing in power. How they effectively lied to voters. And once they got into power, they threw out a lot of their platform promises. They promised to save the basic income pilot, and then lied about that. They promised to not lay off a single frontline worker. And we see teachers and so many other frontline workers losing their jobs, and services suffering. The reality is Ontarians are not happy. Ontarians are not happy with this government. And it's not getting any better. And Doug Ford, trying to, in a sense, hide away for 5 months to help Andrew Scheer, that's not going to work because the scandals keep coming to light. Nepotism and minister conduct. And I can tell you one thing, that when the schools open up again in September, and we realize that the cuts have real impacts, that students will suffer, that their educational choices will languish, that students with special needs, but indeed all students, will have a lower quality of education, and therefore less opportunities going forward. That will hit the Ford government. The decisions they've made now are just coming to light, and they will only face their true impact in the fall. This also includes things like the cuts to OSAP. A lot of students are going to struggle to be able to go back to university, have to get expensive private loans, and so on and so forth. Those impacts will again be reignited in the fall as people go back to school. Or, sadly enough, some people can't go back to school because OSAP was their only way of financing. And that will once again be a story. There will be pieces about individual students who suffered, and the government will continue to struggle in the polls. Look, Doug Ford canceled his number not because of any special interest group. He canceled his number because regular Ontarians were calling. And they kept calling, and they kept texting, and they kept trying to reach him because they are unhappy. And there's probably some people who called who never liked Doug Ford. People who would be critical of Doug Ford no matter what. But I guarantee you there were at least some people who felt hope for Doug Ford. They actually believed in him. And whether or not we want to make fun of those people or say that they should have never trusted him or say that it's their fault, what have you, we should be empathetic and recognize that there were some people who were lied to by this government, and they believe the lies, and they feel betrayed. And I'm sure Doug Ford got calls from those folks too. So that's why he canceled his number. Because he actually doesn't want to hear about Ontarians and their concerns unless they validate his worldview. This is a reality that we're facing. There was a recent poll done, talked about in the Toronto Star. Robert Benzie did a piece talking about the poll, which shows that 2/3 of Ontarians don't think Doug Ford cares for somebody like them. 67% of Ontarians say that the Premier does not care about them or people like them. And of course that means that that's the vast majority of the province. People from various income groups, people from various ethnicities, people from various localities in the province, whether you live in the city or the country or the suburbs, or whether you live in the GTA or Hamilton or in the north or Ottawa. When 67% of the population thinks that you don't care about them or people like them, that means that in every community, in all the diversity of Ontario, people don't think that the Premier cares about them. So don't let Doug Ford spin this. Doug Ford gave out his phone number to try to look like the good guy, to try to be transparent only when it served him, to hopefully get those calls from folks saying, Doug, you're doing a great job, and so that he could sleep soundly at night while he knew he lied to voters and while he knows his cuts are having devastating effects on everyone, but especially some of the most marginalized people in this province. And when that didn't happen, he blamed this quote-unquote special interest groups. But I have a really hard time believing that that's really why he canceled his phone. Because the special interest groups, if that was the case, they would have been bogging him down from day one. He would have had to cancel 1 or 2 weeks into government, because those groups would have been bombarding him. Really, what happened was that people all over the province, Doug Ford voters and people who never voted for him, people with educations and without, people from the cities and the countries and the suburbs, have all been contacting him with real disappointment and disillusionment. And Doug Ford doesn't want to hear it. Doug Ford has a majority government, and so that means for another 3 or 4 years, he has absolute power. And the more he hears from the people, the more that he's likely to question whether he's doing the right thing. So, simple solution for Doug Ford: stop hearing from the people. Sure, they can contact him through his office and his, official email and his official phone number. But, Doug Ford has that all filtered for him by his staff, by civil servants and by his political staff. He's not going to be answering those calls directly. He's really not going to be reading those emails directly, at least not in the vast majority of cases. So at the end of the day, Doug Ford doesn't care about us. Doug Ford doesn't want to hear from you unless you validate his worldview. And that's why he canceled his cell phone. This is being played off as a bit of a joke by some people, like it's a ha, Doug Ford had to cancel his phone because too many people are trolling him. And I mean, I had a hearty chuckle when I read it the first time too. But this is actually kind of serious, because if Doug Ford really did believe this number was all about accessibility and transparency, then the canceling of the number is about him cutting off that accessibility and transparency. This is not what an Ontario Premier should act like. This is not how an Ontario Premier should act. This is not how an Ontario Premier should act towards those values. So keep this all in mind when you go forward. Doug Ford doesn't want to hear from you unless you agree with him, and I don't think that's what we need in a Premier of this province. Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe, and also consider supporting me on Patreon. Doing any or all of those things helps to spread the message, to let people know that Doug Ford isn't just doing things like having personal cell phone numbers out there out of the goodness of his heart. He was doing them for personal and political validation, and when he doesn't get it, he tantrums off and he cuts the line out. And it also helps to let people know that here on YouTube, there are progressive content creators covering Canadian politics in a way that few other people on YouTube do, and in a way that the mainstream media often doesn't either. So if you want to see that voice, if you want to see that content, your support here can really help. So guys, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.